You're listening to Agile Ideas, the podcast, hosted by Fatima Abuchi. For anyone listening out there not having a good day, please know there is help out there. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Agile Ideas. I'm Fatima, CEO at AMO, Mental Health Ambassador, and your host. On today's podcast, I'm joined by Bill Dow. Bill is a distinguished authority in project management, recognized by the Project Management Institute for his exceptional contributions to developing and managing PMOs. With a career spanning decades, Bill has established himself as a thought leader in the field, combining practical experience with academic expertise. His professional accomplishments include establishing and successfully managing 10 PMOs across 4 diverse companies, co-authoring multiple comprehensive books on project management and PMO, and being a recognized expert by PMI in the PMO development and management space. His academic contributions include over 20 years of teaching experience at the college level across North America. Bill's unique blend of hands-on experience and theoretical knowledge has made him a sought-after expert in the project management community. His work continues to shape the industry's best practices and inspire the next generation of project management professionals. Please join me in welcoming Bill to the show. Bill, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I really appreciate you having me.
Well, I thought after the first time we actually connected, even though we've been in similar circles, that it made sense for us to get on this conversation because of the amount of work and experience you have in and around this PMO world. But before we get into that, you were recently a contributor to the PMO Leader Annual Conference, which we co-host. I'm keen to hear a little bit about, was there anything in that experience, particularly speaking to people or after your talk or during your talk, any questions, anything that surprised you, maybe a new trend, some sort of insight, anything that really sort of stood out for you?
Yeah, 100%. So I covered PMO roadmaps. So we went into roadmaps, and what was really interesting is I used the service offering concept, so the things that you do for your PMO, as the basis to build your roadmaps. And a lot of people in the chat were like, I need to relook at that service offering. I'm not doing the service offering in the same way, which was fascinating because when you think about PMOs and how different they are, and it was really interesting on how people approach their PMOs and their various services. And a lot of just people came back and they said, I don't do service offerings that same way. And I thought, oh, that was really fascinating because I've done it that way for years and years. So it was just interesting.
And for those that are listening that maybe either are for or against the concept of the service, I know here we talk a lot about service catalogs, and I've had mixed experience and feedback from people around if you're providing a service catalog, it becomes too rigid. But then if you're not, people don't know what it is that you provide.
Right.
So tell us a little bit more about the service offering, what you mean.
Yeah, 100%. So when I think about service offerings, and so what I've done is I've done governance service offerings. I've done business analysis service offerings, change management, program and project management as service offerings. And so when you really think about the components of your PMO, I break them into those services and then I staff those services. So then I can say, how do I mature those services? How do I, keep moving the dial from a service perspective? And then everyone knows what you're doing in your PMO.
And I think that's probably a really clever way of thinking about it, because you're effectively, correct me if I'm wrong, but without having the resources to support those services, you can't turn them on.
That's right. And that's a hiring tool as well, right? So your executive branch may say, hey, we want you to do governance. And so the PMO needs to run governance. Well, I have no one to run governance. So how would I do that if I don't have the bodies to do it? So you can actually use it as a hiring tool.
Okay, awesome. That sounds good. And when it comes to, you talked about roadmaps, I know you don't know and spend a lot of time in this space. What would you say is the top, 2 or 3 things that you would recommend people look out for when putting their roadmap together for the first time?
Yeah, so I think it's really, really important to not overwhelm the PMO and the members of the PMO. of all these process improvement projects. So when I say build roadmaps, I do it based on services, and then it's a set of process improvement projects for each service. Well, if your PMO is running 40, 50, 60 projects, how do they insert process improvement projects to continue to turn the dial? So you have to be very careful and crawl, walk, run, right? You have to be very careful on how many of these process improvement projects and how fast can you move the maturity of the PMO. And that's what the roadmap's going to do for you. So that's one thing I'd really caution is don't load up your roadmaps with so many process improvement projects while still trying to execute so many programs and projects.
It's worth calling out, I think, because a lot of the time PMOs go about trying to integrate change or introduce capability or introduce services, and I don't think they usually think about it as I like to use the term micro projects, but think about it as like micro projects, as you say, to process improve. And I think if they don't allow a capacity across their week or their month, then those focus areas typically fall by the wayside. So
Yeah.
do you suggest a percentage of time for an average PMO to focus on process improvement
I
projects?
do. I use a 5% rule. I've used the 5% rule for the last, I don't know, 20 years or so. And I basically said everyone in the PMO is spending 5% of their time on process improvement projects. And then what I'm able to do is I'm able then to take that 5% and put it into their performance goals.
Mhm.
So then we're like, oh, okay, so you've got time dedicated, you've got it in your performance goals, merit and stock and all of that bonuses are all based on that. You can only imagine how fast this stuff gets done, right? So yeah, so 2% or 2 hours a week on a 40-hour week is not a lot of time.
No, definitely not. And I think I like the linking it into KPIs and things like that because
Yeah,
often a lot of the things that happen in a PMO are kind of behind closed doors and there's no real visibility and the progress it's making. And it's so blurry
yeah,
completely if there is a lot of initiatives going on at the same time. So I think that's quite clever. But speaking about performance, so I've already told people a little bit about, I know we just dived deep really into a couple of
sure.
things.
Yeah,
But I think it was relevant because we just had that conference. And it was just really insightful, all
yeah.
those first presentations we had. But let's take us back. So tell us about your early career and how did you end up in this space? And then we'll get into what's changed since where you started and where you're now in terms of what we're seeing.
Yeah. So I started in 1991. So way back in 1991, I was a business analyst, and I begged and begged and begged my manager at the time to be a project manager. I said, "Please, can I do it? Please, can I do it?" And she let me do it. And so from there, I fell in love. Right? I said, "This is going to be the greatest job ever." So. And so I just started it all in IT. So I've been in IT, but I've actually spanned outside of IT, but most of my time over 32 years or something has been in IT.
And just before you go
Yeah,
on, Bill, for those listening that maybe aren't in project management, what
yeah,
was it that you knew or didn't know at the time that made you want to be in projects? So was it something you were seeing your peers? Where did the sort of desire to
yeah.
be a PM, what was it about it?
I didn't want to do any work. I'll just leave it at that. I thought, as a business analyst, I thought project managers didn't do the work. They just bossed the teams around. So I was like,
You have a
that's what I
team.
want to do. I just want to do that.
Love it. Love
Now,
it. Okay.
remember, we're back 1991, right? Like
Yes.
things are different. So I was a
Yes.
business analyst and I was writing charters and
Mm,
PRD documents. I go, I don't want to do that. I just
yeah.
want to boss people around. I don't want to do any work.
Yes.
Wow, that's
Okay.
not the case.
It's very different. And
I
it's a
learned
good
that.
it's good aspiring. Like I mean, I remember even like for me many years ago, I remember just seeing what the project managers were getting paid, and I was like, I want what they're getting.
Yeah,
And that's like
I
so
want
it's
that.
small things like that. But okay.
Yeah.
And then how far into, your first project management journey did you learn what it really was all about?
Yeah, very quickly, right? And so back in the day, we didn't have 4 or 5, 6 projects that we were managing, right? There was very, 1 or 2 projects at the most. It just wasn't like it is today, right?
Mm.
And so, but very, very quickly, I just kind of fell in love because I fell in love with the leadership and the directions and the connecting with people and, all that art and science, kind of that negotiation and all that, that type of stuff, as well as the tactical. I like the schedules and the risks and the issues, and I liked all that tactical as well. So I really fell in love with it, and I fell in love with the role, and I've been in it ever since. Just love it.
And then how does the academics path come into it all? And I know you've been doing that for 20
Yep.
years. Where
Yeah,
did that
yeah,
start?
2008. Yeah. So yeah, so wow, so I was actually, yeah, in the early days I just taught IT, but in 2008 I wrote my first book. I co-wrote my first book, the Project Management Communication Bible. And what was interesting is I was a PMP in 2000, and then 2004, 2005, I was part of a master's project management board. So City University, a local university, they had a project management master's in project management class, and they wanted industry leaders to come in and talk and really help guide the program. So we were looking at all the books, and we were basically looking at what each of the courses and the books they had to put they had to buy the students, and we were looking at PM 501, which is a project communication class. I still
Mhm.
remember it, and they had to buy like 4 or 5 different books, and I said, that's crazy. And they said, well, there's just no books out there. It was 2005, there just wasn't a lot of books out there. I said, let's just write one. So my co-writer and I said, let's write a project communication book, and we started writing it. And it took 3 years, every night and every weekend, except Christmas, New Year's, every night, every weekend for 3 years. We did it, but we did it through Wiley and Son back in the day, and that was a big deal. So it was absolutely, Wiley back in the day was massive, and so it
Mm.
was a huge honor to be able to get picked up by them and run their first book. And it was part of the Bible series. So you may
Mm.
remember Word Bible,
Mhm.
Excel Bible, Windows Bible. This is Project Communication Bible.
So then thinking about, I'm sure from what you've described, the writing the book was very challenging and very exhausting, fair to say, and a
Yeah,
complex
yeah.
project. So why did you then go and do 6 others?
Yeah, well, because I loved it, and I could just see there was going to be a lot of opportunity. And I was also working with a project manager who'd been, he was 86 now, he was 60 plus back then. So he had been a project manager for 40 plus years in research and construction and IT. So it was a master class in project management. I
Mm.
learned more about Microsoft Project than you can ever imagine, and more
Mm.
about project management. And so every night and every weekend for 3 years with someone who had 40 or 50 years of project management experience was incredible. So I thought,
Mm.
I'm doing it. And
Well,
then what
mate.
happened is once you get the books, you get the
Mm.
classes.
Mhm. Mhm.
So the courses go, hey, we need a communications class teacher. Do you have a book and your book and blah, blah, blah. And then it just starts snowballing.
Mm.
Conferences and, courses and all that type of thing. So,
And I think I'll make sure we share a link to that book as well as your others in the show notes
okay,
because I
thanks.
think
Yeah.
I've actually got a couple of your books. I've got the
Oh,
the
thanks.
PMO, but I think my more recent ones. I
Yeah,
remember buying them many years ago, early on, just kind of understand because you're right. There wasn't, at least when I was looking for some books, there wasn't that many, particularly
right.
around PMO. So I think
Yeah.
it's interesting to see how some of those, in terms of like leading successful PMOs
Yeah.
um, and managing successful, I think it was called. I might have got the titles wrong, but I'll include those.
Okay. Yeah.
I think when I think about that example you just gave around academia and obviously them looking for that's becoming a lot more common, and I'm seeing a lot more
Yeah.
industry expertise. We were at an event, a PMI event recently, and there was, the university lecturers were there, and they were mingling with the corporate professionals and really trying to cross pollinate
Yeah.
between the two. Is
Yeah.
that, if we think about all the academic side, the work happening in academic side and the work happening in corporate, and you're in both,
Yeah.
what do you do, or how do you balance or help people balance the theory of frameworks and project management and
Yeah.
all of that stuff with the practical?
Yeah. And I think you just said it is you're in both. And so I really try to write articles and do, webinars and all the stuff that I do based on really what people are experiencing, right? Because it's not theory, it's what I'm dealing with. I'm running a very large PMO right now with lots and lots of projects and PMs and portfolio and program managers, and I know the day-to-day challenges. So I try to write those
Mm.
over 20 plus years of doing this. And so I try to say, what are they really going to experience? What are
Mm.
the challenges? What are they're going to, and then how can I help them? Because I just love kind of sharing background experience because there's so many people that want to get into this PMO leadership role and they don't really know what they're getting into, right?
Mm.
Like that's some of the, it's a difficult role. It's not as easy as you think. And you think about a PMO manager who's running 30 people, it's a 1 to 30 ratio,
Mhm.
right? And so, that's some of the things you have to consider, right? So yeah, that's kind of where my thoughts are on that. Yeah.
And then thinking about like a lot of the students that you've spent time with, what's the most
Yeah.
common questions that you get asked? Have they changed over the years or are they really common?
They're common. Yeah, they're common. Is, hey, I stumbled into a PMO manager or leader role. I have no idea what to do. I'm a
Mm.
great project manager, but
Mm.
they now want me to be a PMO person.
Mhm.
That has been the most common thing I've ever seen. Is
Mm.
they think, leadership often thinks you can take a superstar project manager and make them a PMO leader.
Mhm.
And it's so different from the people
100%.
side and the negotiation side and the leadership side. It's just not the same,
Mhm.
right? Influence without authority at a project team is not the same as hire and fire,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And performance reviews and layoffs and downsizing and, all those types of things that you have to deal with.
So let's tap into that a little bit deeper. With someone listening now thinking that they want to go down the path, and I've actually even recently, last week I think it was, I had a head of engineering who's in the market and keen to get into the PMO roles, which
Yep.
a head of engineering is a quite a, I would say quite a juicy, talented, skilled
Yeah.
role. And for them to come and reach out and say, how do I get into PMO? It's obviously the interest in PMO is growing and we're seeing that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what are the differentiators between, say, someone who's sitting there going, I'm a project manager today and I want to get into PMO? What is the big differences, do you think?
Yeah. I'm going to go right with people management. I'm going to go right with when you think about running a PMO, you're running an organization.
Mm.
Price Perry Price, I love him. And he always have said to me, he's always stepped back and he goes, you're running an organization. And I think that's the difference. People don't think about it. So I've always kind of said, you're running a PMO, you're running finance, you're running IT, you're running marketing. You have to think of it. He called it the business driven PMO, right? So
Mm.
you have to think of it as an organization. And sometimes you don't have that skill set as a tactical project manager to think like you're running an organization. You have an organizational budget, you have a training budget, you have things that you just don't have running a tactical project. So that's where you need to get that skill set. Now,
Mhm.
someone for leading an engineering department is going to have that organizational, right? They're going to understand that organizational. They just may not know the tactics of running a project. So
Mm.
then you've got that disconnect, but that organizational, that's a key thing to focus on.
I think the concept of like the business driven PMO and even
Yeah,
thinking
yeah,
about it as running an org is actually it's a really clever
yeah,
way of thinking about it because you think about, you're right, there's resourcing, there's budgets, there's timelines. It's beyond the scope, timeline, costs that you would sort of typically
right.
get in a project. So
Yeah,
I think that makes a lot of sense. So if I'm someone who is in that project management role and I'm keen to get into PMO and I'm trying to figure out, do I spend my, limited resources now investing in training, reading, obviously reading some of your books.
yeah,
If you were starting again now, what would you do to sort of start to build up that knowledge or experience?
yeah. 100% get a coach or a mentor. 100%. I mean, the amount I think Tony Robbins says something like proximity is power, right? And so you think about that. If you get a coach or a mentor who's got all of that experience and that background and can walk you through those things, you're going to grow that much faster than where you are today. Because you can watch a 5-minute YouTube video, you can read a book, but you need to hear tactically how to handle these things and bounce things off. And this is, so that's where I would go right there eventually, or like right there is get a coach or a mentor. That's where I'd spend my resources.
And people be surprised. There's quite a lot of people out there that are volunteering their time to be mentors, and that
Yep.
would actually be willing to do it. I know
Yep.
that some of us have maybe a bit more stretched, or maybe have juniors in the team, and maybe we at capacity. But there are people that maybe are just sort of getting to the really peak of their career that would be open to build that experience. Just to mention that, and I'll include this in the show notes. The PMO leader community runs a
That's right.
mentoring program as well, and I think you
Yep.
might already be aware of it.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
That's definitely a place to start. And I think the other thing that may be relevant, and I'm sure you've done some of this in your career, is volunteering.
Yes.
Volunteering to support projects or in community groups. And is there
Yep.
any experience that you have done where you've put your hand up to volunteer for something that has led, whether it's a conference or a project that maybe has led to more further skills and experience that you didn't think of?
Yeah, a little bit more post-COVID than or pre-COVID than after. But our local PMI area or PMI chapter has had tremendous amount of events and mentoring opportunities and projects where people can get on there and get involved. Part of the college I was teaching for as well had nonprofits that were looking for people, and I've been involved with some of those. So yeah, 100%. There's lots of opportunities out there. And like you said, there's a lot of people that will actually mentor and help coach people.
And I think PMI chapters are
Yes.
absolutely a great place to start. They're everywhere and they
Yeah.
all have the same goals in common. So that's a really good
Yeah.
one. And thinking about just leadership in general. So we talk a little bit about, you mentioned leadership before. What sort of qualities or skills do you think are crucial for someone managing in projects and PMOs today, particularly with the nature of how, volatile and uncertain and complex everything is around us? So what sort of leadership
Yeah.
qualities would you look for?
Yeah, when I think about it, right? So I always keep going back, and I'm the only one that does this, but I keep going back to art and science, right? I keep going back to the core of running a project is art and science. The core of running a PMO is art and science, right? From relationships to advisor to helper to listener, right? And so when you think about that art and science at the project level, that just gets much more complicated at the PMO level. But
Mhm,
those are the core skill sets,
mhm,
right? You just need to come back to being a good communicator, being a negotiator, being a listener, right? And just really having empathy for people. But then there's that technical side. Because if
mhm,
you run PMOs for a while, you see that there's people that are amazing at art, there's people amazing at science, and it's the blend
mhm,
those are the folks that become leaders. Those firefighters out there are often amazing at the technical side, but they may not be great at the human and the people side because they're there to get the job done. But firefighters don't tend to run organizations, right? You don't have a firefighter running HR or a firefighter running marketing. So a
mhm.
firefighter is not necessarily going to run a PMO, or not for a while, or not for a long time anyway.
And if you
So
think
that's where
about
I would go back to.
And I think if you think about firefighters, they're there to react to a bad
That's right.
situation typically, or
Yep.
preventing of
Yep.
risk. So that makes a lot of sense.
And you
It's
can't run an
interesting.
org like that, right? You have to be a
Right.
proactive. You got to be thinking long term, thinking strategy, thinking wide. I
Mhm,
often say running a PMO is thinking wide, not deep.
mhm,
And
mhm.
you can't do both. You can't do both successfully across a large number of programs and projects.
It's interesting because when you think about some PMOs, there are some PMOs that do have that sort of organizational wide view. And then you see some that are more maybe at the program level where maybe they
Yeah.
don't have as much. But I
Correct.
would sort of say that even the program level PMOs themselves have to think about how they interact with those functions outside of their areas as well. So do you feel like there's much difference in the skills and qualities needed at sort of an enterprise level PMO versus a program level PMO?
Not if you break it down to art and science. And I'll tell you a story. It's an interesting story. I was running at Microsoft. I was running a program PMO, and it shut down.
Mm.
And I had people in my office that were going to be laid off, vendors laid off, crying, mortgages, kids in college, right? And it was like, but that's a program PMO. Like that right. And so that is the art side. That's the people, the relationships, and they're gonna get laid off. Like they were vendors and employees, but no, I really don't. I think it comes back to the scale and the depth, of course, and the complexity. But there's two sets, art and science. And then it's just how you apply those across the both or both of them.
I
So
I I,
yeah.
rem I remember once I was being very early on when I before my first project manager role, and I remember being interviewed by an executive who I think he was trying to test me, but he said to me, do you think project management is more art or more science?" And I, at the time, it was much earlier in my career, so I didn't know if he was trying to trick me, but I said it's actually both, and you've just
Yeah.
reiterated that. I did get the answer right at the time, but just to be really clear for those listening, when you think about science, we're talking about like the technical skills and then the
Yeah.
technical know-how, the tools, the all of that
Yeah.
stuff. And then the art side is like the soft skills,
Yeah.
as you said, like communication, leadership, those sorts of things. So it's
Yeah.
having both together that makes all the
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah. It really is. It's a key, two key skill sets that will grow you in this career, right?
And
And leaning towards one or the other
mm,
is okay, but
mhm.
it's the middle of the road people that do it both very, very well. That's where you're going to keep growing in your career.
And that probably also makes them less indispensable. Like it makes
Yeah.
them more likely to be promoted or to be, if there is a group of people that are being like, oh, yeah, like that one with the
Yeah.
multiple skill sets
Yeah.
probably helps. One of the things, interestingly, there's these stats that fly around about PMOs and the fact that, whatever percentage shuts down and this, and I think people neglect the fact that, as you pointed out with the program PMO, there's a defined start and end for a program, and that's why they're
Yep.
they're shutting down. So I
Yep.
was just thinking, like, if we had some suggestions for people in the program PMO role to, I guess, mitigate the risk of them losing their role, how they may be better aligned to, say, an enterprise PMO, or if there isn't one, how they maybe can help frame up some of the benefits of the program PMO to maybe instigate or suggest that. Do you have any suggestions or ideas
Yeah.
on how they can do that?
Yeah, I love that question because we see those stats all the time. We don't often get a lot of data around the stats, but we see the stats. And so one of the things that I've written in my two PMO books, chapters on this, is executive support.
Mm,
You have to have executive support and you have to keep executive support. And that is hard the longer and longer you run a single PMO.
mm,
Because what happens is you got all the executive support in the world when you first start your PMO. You just get hired, you get all the people you want, all the money you want. But the more that you keep running it and it just becomes operations, it weans. Executive support weans. And you see these peaks and valleys, right? And it's at the valley where you got to be careful. The
mm,
other thing that we often see is a 3 to 5 year turnaround of executives,
mm,
right? So I really strongly believe you need to have that executive support to keep your PMO going. The other thing that we talked about, kind of the second thing we talked about, is treating it like an organization, right? So I have this placemat of service offerings, and I have governance and tools and training and all these things, and I've used these placemats for a long time. And at the bottom right, it says program and projects. And every executive that I meet and come into the organization across multiple PMOs, I always show this placemat. And I always put the bottom right, because people read left to right, is, oh, and by the way, we do programs and projects. So when you treat your PMO like an organization, it doesn't get shut down that easy. If
mm,
you treat your programs and projects, it's your PMO just programs and projects, they don't get shut down. Your PMO gets shut down, but the programs and projects don't go away. So
mhm,
it's really about how you market, how you continue to make it valuable, stay aligned to strategy, stay aligned to leadership, continuing to deliver, but it has to be more than just programs and projects.
mm.
And that is something that served me well because I've always tried to treat it like an organization.
It's a really good call out. I think, yeah, people don't really remember that the 3 to 5 year turnaround for exec
Yeah.
roles. It's very timely that you said that. But one thing I really loved is you always hear, and in every survey and in every talk and every presentation, it talks about getting executive support.
Yeah.
And it talks about it as if it's this elusive thing and it's impossible to get. But your point around keeping it,
Keeping it.
strategies around keeping it. So tell
Yeah.
me some strategies around keeping the executive
Yeah.
support so I don't go into the valley.
Yeah. Yeah, so what I've done, and again, I spent 14 years at Microsoft, so I was a big Power BI person, right? So we constantly put dashboards and reports in front of them. We
Mm,
constantly put KPIs. We constantly. So when you're constantly showing data of all the projects and programs that are executing, it's much easier, right? When you're running a solid governance process and they're seeing it go through this governance process, when you're saying, so it's about marketing. It's about continuing to show your value, continue to show and making sure that you understand the points that they're really focused on, right? I have my CIO say, how many active projects are we running? It's like the report's right there, but here you go. Right, so it's constantly showing what you're doing for the organization. That's the key. and
mhm.
and if you stay hide and you stay kind of quiet and you're not constantly out there, then it's going to be a much easier shutdown because it'll just be programs and projects.
Mm.
Right. So you got to be aligned to strategy.
I think also what's really evident is the most common challenge area we've seen this over the last 10 years in running services for clients is the most common challenge is that pipeline demand management, that front door,
Yeah.
that funnel. And I think most of the time, like there was one client who had over, almost 100 projects. And most of them, I'd say at least a third, let's say, didn't align directly to any strategic objective.
Yeah.
And so the PMO at the time was able to articulate those using the data as you suggested, but
Yeah.
actually calling that out. So I think directly linking to the strategic objectives
Yeah.
is a simple thing. And if you don't know what they
Yeah.
are, then you're probably in the wrong job.
Yeah. 100%. You just have to keep that alignment. And as things change, like look how quick AI is happening, right? So as things change, you have to pivot as well, but
Mm,
you want to constantly be always aligned to your strategy. And
mm.
then looking at your PMO and adjusting and what service office do we change now because of the strategy changing.
And then thinking about, we talk about change, I want to sort of take a pivot to change management. So one of the trends that we called out this year that is the relationship between PMOs and change management together, they empowered to do so much more. And where the change management doesn't exist as a capability or a service or a function, PMOs
Yeah.
can really step up. And I think this comms piece around maintaining and marketing, all that, I think feeds into that. What's your perception on the relationship between PMO and change from maybe
Yeah.
even previously till now? And do you have a view either way?
Yeah, I do. And so we had at one we just lost one of our managers that did that, but we had organizational change management within us as a service offering within our PMO.
Mm,
So when you think about organizational change management, there's two massive players, right? ProSci and Cotter. Those are the two kind of players. And they are amazing. Across the board, they're absolutely amazing. And I strongly believe that you need to incorporate org change management in the delivery of your programs and projects. And those two models help you do that. Where I think it falls short a little bit is in the investment that we make in organizational change management people. Meaning, do you put that work on the back of a project manager and while they're running a project, or do you hire a separate change management person that works alongside the project manager during the life of the project and does all those amazing things that Cotter and ProSci lay out there as a set of deliverables? Because adoption is a huge component to program fail and project
mhm,
failure.
mhm.
So I love it. Live and dream. And, if I could go back 30 years, not that those two are around back then, but I would go into change management because it is so important and it's something we just don't do well.
Mm.
Because I don't think it's necessarily in the life of a project that well.
No,
And
it's
that's our
not.
problem.
It's not, and I think that's right. Like you look at a lot of the a lot of the project management methodologies that exist out there, they might reference it a little bit, but that really it's kind of like underpinned. So it's not in
Yeah,
any particular stage of a project.
right,
It's kind of
right.
neglected. I feel like it's
Yeah,
quite neglected, and a lot of change
yeah,
management. Um, I don't think it's getting the light that it deserves to get compared to sort of like where PMO was maybe you might know
yeah,
more than me, but 5 to 10
yeah,
years ago,
yeah,
PMO's now got spotlight on it, whereas it
yeah,
didn't 10 years ago. So I feel like
right.
maybe change management hasn't had their day yet.
No, and those two models are amazing,
Mm,
right? They are absolutely amazing models, but yeah, no, it hasn't had its day yet. And we need to get it there because we're just seeing failure rates. We're not seeing the level of adoption. And we're also seeing massive change too,
hmm
right? There's
hmm
so much change that's happening at such a change rate. That's the other component to it is how much change can the operations or the people that you're delivering the product to can they take,
hmm
right? And so there has to be a component of ownership at the operations level or the people getting the project to adopt that change and to be part of that change cycle throughout the life of the project, because you see it coming late and it's often too late. It has to start from day one.
100%. There's a definitely a reference point to that really just towards the end where we're about to go live with that transition piece. But if
Yeah,
you don't engage early on, there was a program I remember about a year ago that just had failed multiple times, and that part of the reason it was failing was because the change management
yeah,
functional it was outsourced, and the suppliers team kept changing and changing and changing. There was no continuity, so it just sort of became this thing that just kind of people were, oh, we're re-engaged by this change team. And it really didn't go anywhere. But I think when
yeah,
it's done well, the
yeah.
outputs are quite phenomenal.
Tremendous. Yeah. Yeah, there's a model, you may have seen it. It's called a flight risk model.
Hmm.
You've seen one of those before in ProSci? And
Yes.
it's fascinating. It's how an individual will go through a change.
Hmm.
Now, can you imagine if, and we still do phase gates, for example, but can you imagine getting to a phase gate and not going forward because the flight risk model is showing they're not ready yet?
100%.
Now imagine that level of maturity from a change perspective, right? And
Hmm.
how long it could take our projects to get there.
Hmm.
But that's ultimately what you would do. You wouldn't go forward if the organization who's going to get this product is not ready to take the product.
It's a good call out. One of the other programs I remembered was doing change quite successful. We had a business readiness, a technology readiness, and a people readiness. And the people
Yeah.
readiness component was running sort of really light touch pulse check type surveys
Yep.
to measure readiness that was like month one, month two, month three, and then comparing them. And then we
Yeah.
were able to give like a dashboard view again using Power BI
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
provide visibility to executives on this division of this company was ready and this division of this company is not ready. And then
Mhm.
it was escalated to that division manager
Yeah.
to kind of
Yeah.
say, your people aren't ready, as
Yeah.
opposed to sort of brushing it under the carpet and just hoping
Yeah.
it goes well.
But think about how rare that is. That's
Very,
rare. But
very rare.
imagine how successful that it would have been, right? I
Mhm.
mean, I'm sure it was successful when it went live because it checked all the right boxes, the change boxes. So you didn't have to
100%.
fight with adoption.
100%. And
Yeah.
people don't want to, there is some organizations and some clients and some managers that don't care whether we're ready or not. They just want to just do it because we've got
For
our
sure.
KPIs go live and
Yeah.
and I think that's the
It's a
mistake
box.
because the biggest problem is often that all of this stuff gets handed over, or they're thrown over the fence to operations
Yeah.
and becomes
Yeah.
their problem because your project
Yeah.
managers end up having to be moved to other projects.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and that's why the whole industry of, or the whole scenario around ROI and benefits, and
Mm-hmm.
often these multi-million dollar programs, right? When do you get the benefits? A month later, 2 months later, or years later? And
Mm-hmm.
it's often years later, and PMs and teams are long gone. And it's
100%.
really more of an industry problem, right? It's the same thing. You have to have operations own the ROI and the benefit because they're the ones that asked for it and will be around longer. So it is fascinating. It's an industry problem.
And that's on that point, you're right. The benefits realization piece, because it's in particularly large programs, it might be 2, 3, 5 years.
Yeah,
At the end of the day, it becomes someone else's problem. And
that's
who's
right.
really holding accountable to whether we get the benefits or not? I don't know if anyone's
Yeah.
actually,
No,
checking. So
no.
that's
Now,
another.
where you would probably see that is in manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
You'd probably see that in a Boeing and an Airbus, right? We spent millions to build this plane. And so what's the turnaround and how fast can we do it? You'd probably see that in much more mature industries, right?
Absolutely.
Manufacturing, right? Being one, construction. What
Mm-hmm.
does a bridge cost? And then
Mm-hmm.
the highway fees or whatever, right? In different industries, you'd probably get that.
Yes.
But they're at a different scale and they're at a different project management maturity as well.
100%. And I think they are also factoring that effort associated with tracking that all the way at the beginning of the programs
Yeah,
as well. I know in
their earned
defense
value.
they do that. Government
Yeah,
programs usually have to
yeah,
provide that evidence for auditability purposes as
yeah,
well. So I think that comes into it as well.
yeah,
Well, it's interesting because I think there's definitely, like I said, we said a spotlight that hasn't shown brightly yet on change
yeah,
management. So maybe that's coming. We'll see.
yeah,
We'll see how that goes.
yeah,
And then just thinking about one of the other big sort of topics of conversation going on right now, hybrid working, remote working. You
yeah,
said you're running a really large team at the moment. In
yeah.
your organization, what's been the experience, running remote, hybrid? Is it a mix? Like, what's your perception on
We're
how that
all
works?
remote, right? So it's
All remote.
for
Okay.
so we're medical, so we support hospitals. We're in IT, we support hospitals, and before COVID, we
Mm-hmm.
were there,
Mm-hmm.
and since COVID, we were all remote. We continue to be all remote, which has been amazing because we've been able to hire all around America. So
Mm.
we've opened the pool and being able to pull. Now everyone works Pacific Coast time, but we just have had a much larger pool of people.
That's
But
good.
we're all remote. Yeah.
And have you found for you and your team, have you been able to demonstrate to executives that you're either getting the same level of productivity, if not more, like with like the using data and actually providing that sort of
Yeah.
insight?
Yeah, our project levels have gone through the roof over the last 3, 4 years. It is
Okay.
tremendous. We're well over 100 projects that we're managing, all hybrid waterfall, no agile, little to no agile. But yeah, so it's gone through the roof. We've seen basically no drop in productivity. We don't have the time. We're constantly cranking. So yeah, we just don't have the time. So it's worked fine. But the role of a project manager, they work in coffee shops, they work
Mhm.
in, right, they really don't have to be remote.
Yeah.
We prior to COVID, I'd have a project manager run a kickoff meeting
Mm-hmm.
sitting alone in a conference room and
Mm-hmm.
people all around them and they wouldn't walk to the conference room. So, that whole remote thing for project managers is kind of a red herring. They can work anywhere. They're fine. That's the luxury of the role. Give them a laptop and a Wi-Fi and they're good.
You're even seeing these days in the medical space. I know when we did some work in medical, in the private hospital sector, you see some really interesting inventions, but there's even the ability for some doctors to actually work remotely using special technology. And I
Yeah.
remember reading about a surgery that was done from like Asia to, I think,
Oh, wow.
someone I don't know where it was, but
Wow. Yeah.
remarkable. So I mean, they're even
Yeah.
doing medical operations
Yeah.
remotely. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the doctor's appointments, right, have has gone through the roof.
Yes.
Whatever they call telehealth.
Yes.
They've gone
Yes.
through the roof since
A
COVID, right?
hundred
So,
percent.
which has been amazing,
Yes.
right? Because
Yes,
you
it
don't have to
has.
drive to a doctor's office. So, yeah, it's been
Exactly.
great.
And you can fit it in your days. So
You can
I
fit
just
it
think
in your day.
it's an interesting battle a lot of companies are facing, but it's always good to hear and get the different perspectives. So I think that's really
Yeah.
helpful as long as
We're
the work's
seeing
getting
so
done.
many return to office, right? We're seeing all these mandates of Apple and now Starbucks and right. We're just seeing all this and it's causing so much stress, right?
Mm,
It's there's no reason if we had COVID 2.0 tomorrow, there's these companies that are pulling people back would say, okay, go back home, don't miss a beat, log back on. So, you don't it's really interesting that they're doing that, right? Amazon's doing it as well, and that's well known.
hmm.
So it's just interesting, and I think it's causing a lot of heartache when you don't need it.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And then thinking about just in terms of the PMO space, you've written so many books about it. You've spent a lot of time talking about it. You've shared some really great insights so far. If you were talking to someone who was just about to set up a new PMO, regardless of where, maybe it's some program
Yep.
PMO, what would be, if you had to say the top three things, if I could do nothing else, what would be my three things, two or three things that you think I need to prioritize in my PMO when setting up from scratch?
Yeah. So the very first thing I think you have to do is you have to understand the business challenges.
Mm-hmm.
So in several PMOs I've gone to, I've literally sat down and I've interviewed saying, what are your problems with your PMO? And I've heard everything, and it's just like a boxing match, right? And my head just gets pounded. Your people don't do this, they don't do this, they don't do this. Now, are they all PMO problems? No, but
Mm-hmm.
what they are a set of problems that you're going into because you can't. What is you can't improve, you don't measure, right? Or you can't measure, you don't improve. The point is, you know exactly where to focus because these are the current problems. So step one is get the current problems down. Once you have the current problems down, then you can start figuring out what are your services, right? Basically, how do I map the problems to solving those problems? And I've done it through services, and I just said they say we don't have status reports. Okay, we need a reporting tool. They say we don't execute well. Okay, what's our methodology? So it's that mapping between the two, and then it's the hiring of the people.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the three kind of fundamental things that I would say start there because all of it's just going to continue to grow.
Mm.
And then you're going to start thinking about strategy alignment. You're going to start thinking about mission and goals and really starting to think about running an organization, not a bunch of programs and projects.
Mm.
And then everything should just fall in place.
And presumably your business challenges and services, and obviously the people you hire will all again reflect on what the organization's strategic objectives are as well. So
That's
it's sort
right.
of full
Yeah.
circle as well.
Yeah, it's a full circle. And the people that you're interviewing are going to have that in mind. They're going to know that, right? Hey, we're going big on telemed or we're going whatever the case may be, right? So we need projects that focus on that or we have problems in that space or that type of thing. So you're going to hear directly from the people that are currently the customers of the programs and projects that are being ran.
And
Because
then
even regardless if you have a PMO or not, there's still going to be programs and projects being ran in that
for
company.
sure. Well, there's no need for a PMO if there's no projects or programs.
That's right. That's true.
You want to keep the project and program managers happy, otherwise there's no need
That's
for
right.
you. So
That's
get them
right.
on side, that's for
No
sure.
one to manage them.
And then thinking about the up and coming, your junior project manager or your senior project analyst, your coordinator,
Yeah.
someone's really up and coming in their career for project management, what would you recommend they focus on? You talked about art
Yeah.
and science before.
Yeah.
Is there anything within either one of those or something specific that you would recommend that they focus on
Yeah.
to help them in their career?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. So I really have liked what PMI has done with the CAPM. So
Mhm.
when you think about a junior 1, 2, 3 years, I love that CAPM. I think
Mhm.
that's a great entry level, and I'm sure the other methodologies have that kind of entry, but that entry level certification, right? Let's get the words down. Let's get the kind of the taxonomy down, right? And let's understand how we drive a project. Start with that certification and then get some experience,
Mhm.
right? Work alongside project managers, volunteer for projects, do some research, get your coach, get your mentor, and just keep growing, but spend a little time. I don't know, I was 17 years or something as a project manager before I got my PMP. Like,
Mm.
don't rush out and get every certification in the world, right? You
Yes.
may not even like the job. Just
Yes.
like calm down. As a junior PM, get your CAPM. That's
Yes.
awesome, right? That's a
Yes.
low bar,
Yes.
but then it's going to get you, hey, I kind of like this or I don't like this. But the people that rush out and just get every letter after their name,
Mm-hmm.
why? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why are you
Mm-hmm.
doing that?
Absolutely.
So that's where I would go.
Absolutely. It's a good call out. I'll be honest, as someone who hires a lot of people, I've never been fazed by the letters at the end of someone's name
Right.
at all. I mean, unless I'm hiring for, a medical professional, then I'm going
Yeah,
to care about what comes after the
sure.
name. But typically, no. But I can attest to the CAPM with PMI because
Yeah,
that was one of the first ones I did many years ago,
yeah.
amongst other things. But yeah, absolutely gives you the foundational knowledge.
Yep.
And like you said, the glossary, the taxonomy, some of
Yeah.
the theory that then you can supplement by then building on your experience. So I think
Yeah.
that's a really good
Yeah.
quote.
And you'd work alongside a PMP very nicely because you'd be
Yeah,
saying, hey, what's risk management? We know exactly what risk management means. Like
exactly.
we get the same talk, right?
Absolutely.
So
And people you work alongside will give you time and support. And I know
that's
I
right.
got a lot of mentoring, but they're also going to want to expect that you do some of your own homework and not expect
That's
them to
right.
give you all the answers. So
Yeah.
I think that sounds great. So Bill, we're almost wrapping up today. How
Okay.
can people get in touch with you? Is there something specific that you want them to be part of, to download? Is there a specific book you want them to pick up out of all your books? Is there one that you think is the most important to start with?
Yeah, you know what? If one of the links I gave you was buildoutpmptraining.com, there's so much free stuff up there. There's so many free project manager books or ebooks and PMO ebooks, but buildoutpmptraining.com is perfect. And my email, I think you have that, but buildout at dowpublishingllc.com is perfect.
I will
But
make
yeah,
sure I
that's it.
include.
I there's a lot I could push courses and all that stuff, but I'm good.
Well, I'll make sure I link to your LinkedIn, to
Sure.
your email, and to that
Yeah.
website as well.
Yeah, perfect.
And also some of the references you talked about, like the
Yeah.
ProSci, the Coder, etc. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners? A call to action, a piece of advice, or a question to ponder before we wrap up today?
Yeah, when you think about project management, you think about PMOs, you think about it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? You've got your whole career to grow, right? And we were kidding about all the certifications and stuff, right? But it's an amazing career. Yeah, I love it. I just love it. And so when you fall into something you absolutely love, you don't work a day in your life, right?
Mm,
And so think about it as a marathon. Think about a slow journey. There's going to be, there's going to be a lot of problems and there's going to be a lot of successes. And just think about it as a journey and with little sprints along the way, but think about it as a journey.
amazing. Thank you, Bill, and thanks for all the work you've
Mhm.
done in the books. I've definitely got some of them, and
Thank
they
you.
were very helpful early on in my career. So I really appreciate all the work you're
Perfect.
doing.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Please share this with someone or rate it if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and to stay up to date with all things Agile ideas, go to our website www.agilemanagementoffice.com. I hope you've been able to learn, feel, or be inspired today. Until next time, what's your Agile idea?